From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
So welcome back to the afternoon. Thank you all for coming back so promptly. And it's with much pleasure I hand over to Tom Lerner to introduce the panel. Tom Lerner, as you all know, is the head of science at the Getty Conservation Institute. And we always joke about the fact that we usually have to go out of the country to see each other. So I will hand over to Tom to introduce our panel.
Thank you, Fenella. We're missing one speaker. Who are we missing? Oh, here we go. I'm going to keep my comments very, very brief because we run over slightly this morning and we have 4 fantastic speakers now, each with 20 minutes. So I don't want to eat anything into that at all. The bios for each speaker are in your pack. This is a pretty impressive panel, in case you haven't figured this out. I was going to say 4 heavyweights from Europe. I don't want to use that term in any sort of mean way. But if these were people applying for the European Research Council grants, these would be the advanced level for very, very established figures in the European side of conservation science. So I believe, Michel, are you up first? No. I'd like to welcome Michel Menu from the Site RMF in Paris. Michel.
I will move closer to you because I get this right so
So access is the principal aim of an IQ integrated infrastructure initiative, which is Hyperion. So it's, as Luca said, it's a service given to the community in order to get access to cutting-edge facilities, and Aglaé, which is an accelerator-based system installed inside the Louvre Museum in Paris, was at the beginning of this series of iCubes after the first European project called LabSTEC. Aglaé was the only fixed lab facility. And building this series of one message I wanted to emphasize and to point out after Luca is that this opportunity we built with Bruno Brunetti and Antonio Sgamelotti at the beginning, it is the development of this series of iCubes. LabSTEC was a networking project, but URTech and after Charisma and Hyperion enable us to have a permanent, in the future, a permanent infrastructure. And the other thing I have to emphasize is that it strengthens this what is difficult to give a definition for that is heritage science, is natural sciences for the cultural heritage, and also the data process. So fixed lab is for inside Hyperion now is given by 4 facilities. And I will 2 in Hungary, one is in Debrecen, one is in Budapest, and 2 in France. Aglaé inside the Louvre Palace, and Soleil is a synchrotron in Paris, near Paris. And I will first of all describe the 4 facilities in brief and give some highlights which has been achieved during Hyperion. So the purpose of Fixed Lab is to give access to large facilities. Access is provided by complementary non-destructive instrumentation, which gives it's barely not visible, but elemental, structural, and chemical analysis. And with the neutron project, I will show that we are able also to do some imaging. So first, the first facility in Hungary is Atomki in Debrecen. There is access to ion beam techniques through a Van de Graaff particle accelerator, and Zita Zixai is the coordinator, the head of this project, the access for cultural heritage. So in brief, IBA is a set of different techniques which is energetic particles induce several excitation of atoms and gives clues in order to have elemental analysis, a total elemental analysis with PIXI, which is maybe you are more familiar with X-ray fluorescence, is almost the same. And for the light elements, lighter than silicon, for instance, you can use the nuclear reactions. And you may have also analysis, information in depth from the first micrometers from the surface. So in Atomki, they have a nuclear microprobe. That means in vacuum, they can have beam spot of 1 micrometer in diameter and can get elemental maps or concentration at this stage. But an external microbeam is also available with about 20, 30 micrometers in diameter, because you have a spread of the diffusion of the beam in air, and you may analyze directly the object without putting him in vacuum, without any preparation. So that's a team. The Zita is here, and we know, and the Iberian community all know all this, her, and also her colleague here. So the second facility is Budapest Neutron Center, associated with the Wigner Center, and it's based on a neutron reactor, and gives several techniques I will show now. The neutrons are used for elemental analysis. You may get this kind of analysis. You can also achieve structural studies with neutron diffraction or small angle neutron scattering, and also with neutrons is used for imaging. In this example is given with an Egyptian jar, which was the imaging with neutron of this jar was most interesting in order to understand what the content of the jar was. So that's a team. The head of the project is Laszlo Rosta. The BNC welcome desk is Zolt Kastowski, and also the Laszlo Zemilkowski is the coordinator of the access to BNC. The third facility is Soleil, is a synchrotron of the third generation, which has been implemented a few years ago, south of Paris, in Gif-sur-Yvette. Among the about 20 beam lines, 11 beam lines can be used for cultural heritage. These are the application you may get. Frédéric Fressard is the leader for Hyperion, as a task leader of Soleil. So you may have tomography beamlines at Soleil with the anatomic Psyche and Puma. I will come back to Puma a little bit later on, and gives some information with if you increase the resolution, you decrease the energy and so on. You have also micro beamlines at Soleil. You have 5 beamlines which can be used for cultural heritage purposes. What is also said is that this project is enhanced not only on cultural heritage artifacts per se, but also with paleontological artifacts. So Puma is a beamline which has been with photon utilisé pour les matériaux anciens, it's an acronym, and it has been optimized for ancient materials, that means for cultural and paleontological materials. And 60% of the beam time will be allocated to ancient materials. That's a description of Puma, and this beamline, which is developed ongoing at the moment, will be open in a year, about a year from now. That's a team. Sorry for, but the Soleil is more than 300 people, so it's headed by Jean Dayan. And Frédéric Fressat is somewhere here. He's barely invisible, but Frédéric is here. So Aglaé, in my laboratory, and a long time ago I installed this machine, and at the moment it's stopped for renewing and for new to be completely transformed and to be completely automatized, to have a better, to give a better service to the people, and so it's a tandem accelerator, which has been, it's an American tandem accelerator from Wisconsin, Middleton, Wisconsin, Madison. And this is the only accelerator which is 100% devoted to cultural heritage. And Claire Pacheco, who is here, is now the leader of the group with 3 other engineers, Brice, Quentin, and Laurent. So now for the recent application and some highlights. The first highlight was sent to me by Atomki, by Zita. So they analyze glass weights, and in order to answer to detailed composition of this glass weights of the prehistory, identification of the traces and the other colors, and in order to look at the technology. And at the same time, the same Portuguese team sent medieval glass from a site in Italy, and here are the samples which are embedded in resins, and the questions are almost the same: composition, characterization, and also the understanding of the alteration of the glass. Another highlight has been given to me by the Budapest Neutron Center, and they analyzed by Daniela Di Martino some artifacts from the Milano Cathedral. And they analyzed, they wanted to understand the deterioration of roads, which strengthens the architecture of the cathedral. And if you see or you have to trust me about, because that's deep and it's not bright enough. But here you have cracks which are visible by the naked eye, but others are not invisible and has been revealed, brought to light with the neutron tomography. And this hidden cracks considerably weaken the strength of the materials, and it was interesting for the architects in order to restore the cathedral. Another example, briefly, is concerns this processional cross with the same applicant, Daniela Di Martino, from Abbey in Italy, close to Milano. And the result of that was, and they used not only gamma activation, but also some XRF, X-ray fluorescence, and other techniques. And the presence, so it's a silver cross which is gilded, and they will be able to confirm through the presence of mercury the amalgam technique. Sorry. The last highlight I wanted to present is one which has been achieved in my laboratory. Is a medieval project, is lustered ceramics from the Iran. And this map shows the invention of the lustered ceramics in Mesopotamia in the 8th century after Christ. And this technique spread all over the Mediterranean basin to arrive in Italy during the Renaissance period, through Egypt, Maghreb, Spain, and this technique continue at the same time. And so these objects are so valuable that if they are like this, you are not allowed to sample them. And so the ion beam techniques are very interesting in order to show how the stratification of the luster has been achieved during this time. And so we have this technique called Rutherford backscattering spectrometry. And through processing the spectra, you may analyze the different thickness of the luster proper, which is a small, it's metallic nanoparticles which are embedded inside the glaze of the ceramics. And processing that, you may achieve the thickness of the coating of nanoparticles, the thickness of the glaze, and how deep is this these nanoparticles embedded inside the glaze. And so you can achieve through that this stratigraphy, and the glaze, the luster, the glaze again, and the ceramic body. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Michel. We'll get through the 4 presentations, and then there'll be a Q&A answer session at the end. Our second speaker will be speaking about the second of the 3 services under Hyperion CH dealing with transnational access. So you've just heard about the Fixed Lab work package. Antonio Scamolotti, Professor Emeritus from University of Perugia, will now talk us through the MoLab work package, looking at mobile laboratories. Antonio, welcome.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much. So I will speak about the mobile laboratory and archives in Hyperion CH. I will start with the archives. Archives were introduced in the last project in Charisma, and it was a very successful platform. It's the access to the archive of European Museum and Cultural Heritage Institution. We started with 6 institutions: the National Gallery in London, the Opificio delle Piedre Dure in Florence, the Centre de Research and Restauration in Paris, the British Museum in London, the Museo Nacional del Prado in Madrid, and the Cultural Heritage Agency of the Netherlands. In the Hyperion, there was an increase of the institution giving the service. We now have the Instituto del Patrimonio Cultural de Madrid, the Centre for Art, Technological Study and Conservation of Copenhagen, the Radgem Museum in Berlin, and the Institut Royal du Patrimonio Artistique in Brussels. This is a physical access, it's not a visual access. The archive contains a lot of documentation, but not just the documentation, also samples, also cross-sections, and so on and so forth. And those are in different sizes, in different nations. So some example, for instance, in Opificio delle Piedre Dure, you get a lot of information concerning Raphael, data, cross-sections, reflectography. In the British Museum, you get information about the technique of old statua, as in the Egypt time, and then you get cross-section, then you have a spectra, then you have map. So a lot of documentation which can be very, very useful. Useful to whom? Thank you. You are always the chairperson. Useful to whom? To researchers that they want to collect information, for instance, on painting, on the material, colors, support, stratigraphy, and composition of the ground. Art historian or archaeologists that want to carry on provenance studies on different techniques. Conservator and scientists. It's not working properly, but it doesn't matter. There was some example. For instance, one of researcher from Czechoslovakia went to the Opificio delle Piedre Dure to study the ground of the 16th century painting. And there were a lot of information. This is a typical case. This is the Paolo Uccello, La Battaglia, the famous Battaglia. Is a triptych, but the 3 parts are in 3 different museums. In Florence, in Galleria degli Uffizi, in the National Gallery in London, and in the other one is in
Paris. Louvre.
Louvre, of course. Sorry. I always, as Italian, disregard my cousin, the French one. So this was a case of a researcher on this triptych, and the best way was to go to the archive of these 3 important institutions, where a lot of information are present. And this, you see some of the people working in Madrid, in London, and in Paris, in a very relaxable atmosphere. And also the environment is very pleasant as well. Now let's go to the mobile laboratory, which together with the fixed lab was the first infrastructure in the European project. In EU Artec, there were just these two infrastructure. And then you see things are going to increase according to the needs of the cultural heritage community. In the previous Charisma, we had just two providers, the CNR, both the Perugia and the Florence CNR, and then the University of Perugia, and very recently also a regional laboratory in Spoleto joined to this joint project. And then the CNRS in Paris. These were the two providers in the previous. Now we have some more providers. For Foundation for Research and Technology in Hellas, Heraklion, the Nicolaus Copernicus University in Toruń in Poland, and the Aachen University in Germany. Which are the users? The users are conservatores, who carry on research on innovative methods of restoration and preservation, just to make an example. Conservation scientists, we want to integrate their measurement by macrosampling with non-invasive investigation, and of course, art historians and archaeologists who want to study execution technique in painting, ceramics, in sculpture, in a lot of artworks. Few examples. This is a study that was done by the MOLAB, and the title was Multi-Criterial Studies of the Last Judgment, which is an attribute to Hans Memling and is in the Gans Museum in Poland. What was the aim of the project? It was to study changes in design, details in the composition, stage of underdrawing, different character of painted layers, in order to identify material, technique, and also the artist, because probably it's not just Memling, but also the hand of Van der Weyden is present in these big paintings. And the user is Professor Ivona Smeker of the Academy of Fine Arts in Warsaw. I just want to point a point, an important, which is in accord to the European rules. All Ivona was the users. In the data, the intellectual properties of the results, according to the European rules, belong to the users. They do not belong to the MOLAB operators, but to the users. Very often, at the end, there is a collaboration, and very often there is a common publication. That was a very, in a way, long project, because 3 MOLAB facilities were involved, both the CNR, the University of Perugia, and the CNRS, for 15 days of in-situ access. Usually, the intervention lasts 5 days, and you spend a lot of time traveling. You can, I want to say that in the last 12 years, we have been traveling for more than 200,000 kilometers in Europe, which is quite a lot. 15 days because there were 3 different MOLAB facilities operating with 10 MOLAB operators, 4 users, and 6 non-invasive instruments, which are here, XRF, mid and near infrared, UV visible spectroscopy, XRD, multispectral scanning. This is the MOLAB working. Fortunately, there were 3 separate parts of the triptych, so we were able to work at the same time on the three different parts. And we got a lot of results. I just want to show some of those. For instance, using FATR and also XRD, and I want to stress the importance to use different technique to get some useful result. In the gem of St. Michael's, there is pure lazurite, while in the blue dress of Mary, there is lazurite, and lazurite with a little amount of diopside, and azurite with the impurity of barium, while in the reflection of the blue dress on the sphere, there is azurite. The infrared didn't get good result on this case, but we were able to get interesting result using the diffractions. For instance, we were able to detect the lithium yellow type 1, the cinnabar, the lead white in both hydrocerussite and cerussite, and also using UV visible both in reflectance and in emission, the Mother Lake. Very, very interesting were the results with the reflectography. Some results were already known. This is, for instance, the visible light, and this is the X-ray already made by the user in Warsaw. And also they have made some reflectography image, but look the difference in how can you see the details using the reflectography of the INO CNR in Florence. You can see easily all the details, and according to these results, it's probably that the underdrawing is not Melling, but probably van der Weyden. Research is still in progress from this point of view. And all these results were reported. One of the chapters of Science and Art, the painted surface, edited by the Royal Society of London, of which I am one of the editors, together with my colleague Brunetti and Costanza. And as you can see, this is a joint publication among the user, Jonas Smelter, and the MOLAB operators, Laura Cartechini, Aldo Romano, and Luca Pezzavi. Passing from the previous charisma to the UARTE, there was also an increase of technique. We already had point chemical analysis, but we include more other techniques like multi-hyperspectral imaging in the visible near infrared, and also X-ray fluorescence scanning, including 3D surface and volume image, which were implemented in the joint research activity of the previous project. There is a strong connection between the joint research activity, which has to, the mission is to improve the facilities in the MOLAB. So they implement new instrumentation, and once they are tested and they are well functioning, they became part of the MOLAB. So there is just few examples. XR mapping. You see, this is a collaboration with the Istituto Superiore Centrale del Restauro. This painting of the 15th century was completely black, probably due to fire in the chapel. And it was almost impossible to read. But look, through mapping the different elements, lead, copper, iron, gold, and iron, you can see easily. And so you can be a good guide in the restoration processes. Hyperspectral imaging, this is some of the work that the University of Perugia did, in which it was possible, apart from the lead chromate, to detect some important pigment, like viridian, which is in red, emerald green, which is in green, and ultramarine, which is in blue. Then, from the fourth, this is the digital holographic spectral pattern interferometer. And it was used to reveal in situ detachment, crack, and other defects. The purpose was the examination of 19th century ceiling to assess detachment of encrates through the defect map, risk map comparison with conservator map. This is a mobile single-side NMR provided by the ACE, and you can get information about the depth profiling of hydrogen-containing materials in stone, mortars, painting, and so far. Optical coherence tomography provided by Torum in Poland for examination of layered structures, missile painting, and this is a project in collaboration with the Opificio delle Pietre Dure on the Leonardo Madonna dei Fusi. And that's all. The next call is coming soon, the 15th of February. Usually there are two calls, which are 15th of September and 15th of February. So if you are interested, the call is almost ready to be announced. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antonio. And I know there'll be some questions about submitting samples and projects for these things when we get to the Q&A. Our third speaker, thank you, Pernilla, is Jürgen Vardem, who seems to be a director of many, many places in Copenhagen. But the quickest way is perhaps to talk about the new Centre for Art, Technological Studies and Conservation called CATS. And Jürgen's going to be talking about the cooperation networking side of Hyperion CH. So, Jürgen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, you introduced the whole gang up here as being a very old and mature consortium, and true you are, of course. However, CATS, which is a small national research infrastructure comprising the National Museum of Denmark, the National Gallery of Denmark, on which I'm working, and the training school facilities at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts, training for conservators. We only joined this group of excellent researchers very recently when Hyperion was established after all the other preparatory research infrastructures. So we are entirely new in this, but nevertheless we have been charged with the task of facilitating cooperation and networking internally within Hyperion, and also to reach out to users and users outside Hyperion in order to promote European cultural heritage science. And we are, of course, as you can see on the slide, and which you will have in your on the website of this institute afterwards, we wanted to foster cooperation and interaction with heritage science communities, all the users of the transnational access points that we just heard about, and potential scientific industrial partners. We also want to address more widely the multidisciplinary researchers and stakeholders concerned with this research area, including both conservators, but also curators, historians, archaeologists, and whoever is working with cultural heritage objects also within, as I said, industry or institutions or small and medium-sized enterprises. The specific objectives are many, and you can see them here. It's focused on a high-level advocacy of the expert meetings. We want to make hands-on workshops. I'm going to mention a few in a moment, seminars, and to disseminate this as widely as possible, and hopefully to engage as many of you as possible in the audiences when they are open for everybody. But we also organize more internal workshops where it is the Hyperion partners that collaborate with maybe a few stakeholders that we take in to be operating not within a vacuum, but within still the surrounding environment. We also want to carry out a number of best practices and protocols to develop this, to publish them for all of you, and to carry out foresight studies, as you can see, in order to identify future research priorities, what we heard about earlier today, and opportunities for innovation in this. You can see these acronyms, CATS and CNR and NG and KIC-IRPA. They are the institutions that are in charge of these individual projects within Work Package 9. So what we are doing in CATS is trying to take care of the knowledge exchange activities, establishing these best practice and protocols together with the CNR, Susanne Bracci, who is not here, and we, with Marika Spring, representing the National Gallery, will work on these foresight studies I just mentioned, and Erik Bylings from KIC-IRPA will work on creating digital data management and procedures for this. This will start later on in the project, and we do not have much to share on this from my side at this very moment. We have a lot of deliverables that we want to share that would be visible on our website and eventually published also on other media, reports and surveys, analytical data expectations. We have recommendations of best practice, etc. We have a whole range of deliverables that you can see on the Hyperion homepage. And they go on. We are supposed to have a very busy 4 years of research and presentations, as you can see. Well, some of these activities have taken place, of course. We have had an international conference on glazed ceramics and archaeological heritage, which was the first conference we organized within the current Hyperion network. And the aim of this conference was to discuss azuelos and other architectural glazed ceramics of historic interest manufactured and applied anywhere that they may have been, their characteristics, the decay, and the conservation of these kind of objects. It was a conference that was attended by 81 delegates from a lot of different countries. Well, that was the top one. The second one was a more internal workshop with just a few stakeholders from outside the conservation restoration community of the Netherlands, cleaning of paintings and protections of metals. It was a workshop organized by Martin van Bommel from the RCE in Amsterdam, in collaboration also with a joint project initiative research project called CMOP, which is an abbreviation for Cleaning of Modern Oil Paints, which is a consortium between the University of Amsterdam, the Tate, the Getty, and a number of other partners that work on identifying safe cleaning of modern oil paints. Again, there is a relationship with Nano-Rest Art, which is another project running from until 2018, actually. It is Klaas-Jan van den Berg, who is sitting here in the auditorium, who is the project leader of this project about the cleaning of modern oil paints. But the workshop there was more of internal character, defining what kind of projects and approaches would be most relevant. Another project was investigating heritage material with safer ion and photon beam experiments. It took place as a collaboration between the CDR-DMF and the IEA and the Ipanema in Paris. And the meeting was also there, attended by a huge crowd, 40 participants and 30 guests from around the world. 18 countries were represented. And the program included, apart from plenary sessions presenting also recent advances, also round tables thematic and open sessions for the people attending this meeting. In Copenhagen, organized in collaboration between the Prado and the National Gallery in London, CATS hosted a workshop called Preparation for Painting, Grounds and Primings in European Painting 1500 to 1800. And this was a workshop which is operating very closely with a workshop 8, which is led by Joe Padfield and Marika Spring from the National Gallery. You will hear more about this from Joe in a while, I'm sure. The objectives of this meeting were to discuss and develop suggestions for a database for cultural heritage objects. And great quantities of data, like cross-sections that we have heard about in the previous speaker, will lie in archives and be accessible via ArtsLab. But if we could digitize them and put them online, we could share them with the world, and you could share yours with us, probably. So the idea is to create a Europe-wide scale collaborative development between conservation science and digital documentation specialists to more efficient access to cross-sectional data, improve data comparability across a consortium. You may imagine that photographs of cross-sections made in one lab with one set of filters are difficult to compare with cross-sections of the same artist's materials in another lab with different set of filters, although we call them the same type of either UV or natural light, whatever. So we hope to come up with suggestions for this over the course of the Hyperion research area. And we also had a conference where we were studying European visual arts, 1800 to 1815, hosted by CATS in Copenhagen. And this was a technical art history conference because we tried to bridge conservation science to the hardcore humanities art historians. And they are not, some art historians fall asleep when they see cross-section number 3. And scientists may do the same when they see, I don't know how many images of something that they... But we want to bridge this and make questions and maybe try to see if what we call technical art history is actually not just art history as it was in the past, with an added scientific value of the analytical data that science can produce for the understanding of cultural heritage objects in general. So we were studying this over 2 days, and we had participants also from the US in this conference. And then we've just had our first doctoral summer school, Advanced Characterization of Techniques, Diagnostic Tools, Evaluation of Methods in Heritage Science. It took place in Madrid and was organized by the Hyperion in Spain. And this doctoral summer school will provide advanced lectures on analytical and diagnostic tools for students. The lectures were including up-to-date development in conservation materials and recent advances of all the aspects that you would need to be put in front of in order to go out and work in our sector. And there were 30 students attending this summer school, also from 14 different countries within the European community. Well, forthcoming meetings, intangibility matters. It's an international conference that the ELNEC in Lisbon is organizing in May 17, 2 days, which will look at the immaterial side of tangible cultural heritage and discuss all sorts of aspects related to the values and reflections, etc. Keep an eye out for the announcement for this conference. I bet it's going to be very interesting for those working with intangible matters. And there will also be a joint project initiative neck-to-neck conference taking place 2 days after in Beja in June, also working in that same direction and trying to investigate objects of that nature. The ion beam proton workshop was so popular that the members wanted to have another one. So another one is popping up also in 17 in June, It will be taking place in Amsterdam and organized by the ICN in collaboration with NICAS and other partners. Keep an eye out for that, for those of you who are interested in this kind of workshops. And then finally, there will be an international conference called Tempera between 1850 and 1950, a painting technique of the dawn of modernity, which will be held at the Dörner Institute in Munich. And it has to do with that in recent years, a new and profound attempt was made to explore the complex research field of tempera painting in the 19th and 20th century, which has until now only been very, very briefly discussed in literature. So we want to organize here a 2-day program, which also will look at sources of the studio practice, materiality, and of course the art historical aspects of why is tempera painting having this revival at that particular moment, and how can that assist us in understanding, you could say, the bigger picture of the movement, the interaction of technology and aesthetics in painting of that particular period. There will soon, here in December, be a call for contributions to this conference. So keep an eye out for this too. Well, drawing into other work packages than the one that Katz is particularly in charge of, is a work package here on establishing best cross-disciplinary best practices and protocols. Susanna Bracci have been making a survey and have asked colleagues, primarily in the European community, to reflect on best practices within analysis and treatment of a variety of objects and materials that we encounter in our cultural heritage arena. And this report will be coming out pretty soon and will be the basis for further research within Hyperion, such as the foresight studies and best practices and protocols, but mainly the foresight studies and, as I'm mentioning here, which is aiming at exploring the idea within Hyperion not to replicate what's already being done elsewhere in the development heritage science strategies, but to consider the question from the point of view of developing strategies that support the research infrastructures, examining what instruments and tools might be needed to address the research priorities being identified by the group, and where and how these are needed to fill the gaps. This work is also ongoing, and we have research results coming out as they emerge. There will also be a course planned in November 17 in London. It'll be held and combined with the second user meeting, taking advantage of the presence of an audience of stakeholders in London. The date has been chosen to immediately precede another planned Hyperion workshop activity, a colloquium on 3D imaging, to be held at the British Museum on the 10th of November 2017. So you're well ahead and can start saving up for the travels. And we hope that it'll draw participants, a lot of participants from also this country. Leading up to the speakers of tomorrow also, we have a work package or a task in the work package, Network and External Cooperation on Heritage Digital Data Management, Exploitation, Use and Reuse. It's a very long title for this, and it is Erik Bylings from the KIK in Brussels who's coordinating this. And as I said earlier, the project is beginning to form itself now, and in the beginning of 2017, a first survey will be carried out within this network to identify and gather all relevant information regarding the task. And the main point of interest will be to define a broader network also outside Hyperion, and see how the questions will be geared there to involve Europeana, Daria, and other stakeholders. Sharing data is something that some fields in the humanities are not very good at, I dare say. Others are very good at them. I believe that conservation science and conservators are sharing quite a lot on this. However, there are still elements within research data that are not being shared. Let me just mention one, dendrochronological data, that is kept very strict to the people who do this. Maybe we should discuss how that could change for the benefit of the entire field and the cultural heritage objects, where you can combine, of course, knowledge about climate, heritage objects, either lecterns, paintings, sculptures, archaeological wood, everything comes together there and can be of huge importance for the field. So having said all this, and having showed you 2 slides very quickly here that you haven't got time to read, I think I will simply just say thank you and keep up for the slides you will get, and I hope that many of you will join the network activities that we organize within Hyperion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jürgen, and thank you actually for our 3 speakers so far for being very punctual, and in fact a little bit early. We're catching some time up. So no pressure, Georgios. You have to not let us down. Our final speaker, Georgios Karagiannis, he's behind me, right? Yes. The scientific and technical head from the Diagnosis Centre of the Ormelia Foundation in northern Greece, and he'll be talking about the knowledge and innovation technology transfer research going on in Hyperion CH.
So thank you very much for being here. Well, I'm going to talk about knowledge, innovation, and technology transfer in Hyperion project, which is a rather difficult action, actually. Well, since our cultural heritage is our common memory and knowledge as human beings, one of the main concerns should be the cultivation of the current and the next generations. We do believe that, and so UNESCO guidelines and documents are indeed fostering consciousness of our culture through the cultivation of the current and the next generations. So this is in accordance with UNESCO. Also, the technological development, and we are living the era of the technological development. So our endeavor should also focus the cultivation of the next generation towards the cultivated use of technology. I would say that technology and culture are things that go together, but technology is, as you know, a Greek word related to the techni, and which is the art, and which is also the craft creation, actually, and the term of logos, which is actually our wisdom, finally, and finally our spiritual heritage. Hyperion project is not far away from this main idea and this main target, I would say, because we are using in Hyperion various different kind of radiations and state-of-the-art prototypes in order actually to make endoscopy of an object and search the deepest information of this and the deepest and the hidden beauty of the art objects, which is actually providing us the possibility to create new cultural richness. And this is very important because the self-consciousness that we are achieving using the results of the analysis, it's more or less an exercise about our self-consciousness, according to Socrates, which means gnosis αυτόν. And this is a great power, actually, in order to create a new heritage and a new art. Well, within this vision, I would say that now, as you have seen in the morning and from other presenters, we have an accumulated knowledge within this series of projects, which actually LabStech was initiated in some initial discussion of Professor Brunetti and Professor Gamelotti in our lab in Ormelia, based in a previous existing network. Well, so again, something started again from Greece here, and of course, this accumulated knowledge is enriched using these access actions. And by the access actions, we are gaining advanced knowledge because we are not providing our analysis only, but we are gaining much knowledge from the net users. So this sorry, it's okay. So Michel and Adonio talked about these actions before. I would say that the knowledge and the innovation that we are gaining within this project and actually in Hyperion project is mainly based on transnational access and the joint research activities that are main pillars of the project. So, well, I would say that now, Professors Gamellotti, Antonio, we are in the position to say that we have a new heritage. It's not only the heritage of the data that we have acquired from cultural heritage objects, but it's also the heritage of the technology platform that we have. And this technological platform provides us the possibility to have this osmosis between the communities of the technology providers, the chemists and the physics and the engineers, with art historians and the conservators. And this is now made praxis. So I would name that this is a blessing and finally a blossom of a new science. This is my dimension look about heritage science. Well, and of course, the incarnation of innovation in Hyperion project is mainly based on the diagnostic instruments which we are going to talk tomorrow about, diagnostic methods and the data that we are producing via the three actions that you have been presented before. So, what we are offering? We are offering a rich, we are in the position to make analysis in various kinds of objects. Paintings, Byzantine icons, metallic objects of various metallic materials, ceramics, wall paintings, glass objects. And using these techniques like optical tomography, nonlinear imaging, spectroscopic mapping imaging or mapping images or imaging, Raman, micro-Raman, acoustic microscopy, new technique, nuclear magnetic resonance imaging, terahertz imaging. We are providing to the end user and the community two-dimensional mapping images of the materials or the other drawings from pictorial information to two-dimensional images, and finally combining them with tomographic information. We are reaching to having, by the coupling point of the analytical points and the imaging method, high resolution and fidelity 3D tomographic information with all the qualitative information embedded on them, in them. So this finally provides us the possibility to support the vivid navigation of the adventure of the art object in time and in space. So we can navigate in the beauty of these objects while the time passes in the space that we were found. Okay, I had in mind to give some paradigms, which will be presented better tomorrow in my presentation, just to be coherent with the previous speakers, in order to have a more vivid information about the kind of information that we are receiving. Sorry, it was, we can go here. Yes, next. Okay. So, of course, we are, I took from our colleague Hilde some, by chance, some cases. We are using the kind of information that we have is by infrared reflectography, for instance, the other drawings beyond the visible, so we have information about what happens in the other layers of the object. And of course, in this case, for instance, we can reveal the foils on the gold leaf in specific areas of the art objects. And then, using terahertz, for instance, imaging, we have better penetration depth than the infrared imaging, revealing the hidden gold in a specific art object. There. And mapping images, as Antonio has presented before, so we have surface information with the materials on it, as well as using synchrotron-based X-ray methods, we have evidence of the degradation of the materials on the surface as in the other layers. And then we have mapping images, and also hyperspectral imaging, we can observe better the distribution of the molecules on the surface of the object. And finally, tomographies, one paradigm is the optical Kochemer tomography here, with which we can navigate in the depth of the information of the object, revealing the pathology of it, the application of the various varnishes and the pigments in a depth. Well, and since philosophy means praxis, in work package 11 of our Hyperion project, we are trying finally to transfer this innovation and documentation about art objects to the industry and mainly to small, medium enterprises. And I would question me, and vice versa, I'm not sure. The osmosis between research community and industry, or mainly SMEs, will be stressed, targeting to the creation of novel products and spin-off companies. These guidelines, European Commission prays for that, and I do believe that the market needs of such kind of actions. But this action is a multi-directional interaction, I would say, because this process that are needed to be done in order to reach in such a target are unidirectional and are characterized by the interactions in order to try to match the supply with the demand. So we have to see if we need what is the demand and what is the market behind this. And in this case, there are many factors, actually. Mainly the researchers. It's us which have to place their ideas in order to chase for new funding. And then the other also side, we have the institutions, where they have to adapt themselves to new global, European or national research policies. And what about their social impact and assessment? We have to have a turnover to the society about the funding that we are gaining and give this knowledge to the society back. And then the companies are the other actors and private sector which need, indeed, in the planet, the companies need new ideas and new opportunities in order to overcome recession. And finally, the governments, the decision makers, who want to assess their investment in order to account for their policies. And here we have to fight, towards the governments in order to take care of cultural heritage. And the various actors, of course, imply various needs, which must be coordinated. And then main challenge for research result transfer up to now have been the traditional patterns of databases, usually in patent offices. Of course, this kind of channels, in order to disseminate your knowledge, the patents are restricted and they are not so well accessible via the web technologies. Therefore, we thought that new instruments are needed in order to transmit the knowledge. And social media is such kind of tool in order to do this work. Because they have, because of their features, scholarly community has increased employing social media in order to communicate the results in a better and faster way. And furthermore, studies about new metrics based on social media are being developed. What are the existing tools? The existing tools of social media are like LinkedIn or Academia, ResearchGate, okay, Facebook. No, I don't believe that, but in any case, this is also in social media. This situation shows that the importance of social media is constantly increasing. Indeed, it is increasing, and the new generations are using them. For this reason, we thought that an ad hoc social media focused on innovation and technology transfer could increase the communication between various actors that I presented you before and the whole innovation system. So, in order to maximize the technology transfer within the Hyperion project, we, based on common interest between industry and research area, looking forward to win-win collaborations. So a new tool, we decided to develop a new tool, which named Spinbook, which was developed by ICRES and finally was adapted in collaboration with Ormila Foundation for the needs of Work Package 11 of Hyperion project. Well, I'm presenting you fastly this tool that is placed now into operation, and from now on we are starting, we will start using this. Well, Spinbook considers all types of factors involved in the innovation process, from researchers to companies, public administration, investor, intermediaries, enterprises. These are the stakeholders of this. So we expect that Spinbook will be used by various actors. Political decision makers will also, and universities should use this. So as far as one can enter to the system, has to build a profile identifying himself as a researcher or enterprise or a broker or funder or public administration. So you make a login and you make a profile there. So also we expect that the industrial sector should be able to access the selected high-tech information in order to assess in a reliable way the economic potential of the range of available skills and technologies and to have the chance to acquire it within a short space of time. So also the industrial sector is there. And I can skip this. So then in Spinbook, we have the possibility to have a direct communication among these profiles. So Spinbook aims to set up a social room between all the actors for the innovative process, giving them a sustainable visibility and also giving a boost to new ideas and projects. So we have a concrete control of the data and careful validation. So when you are filling your profile, you are filling some basic information related to the researcher and to the institution in order to identify them. This can be done in some minutes. And then this is a real-time system, is informed real-time, so the various actors among them can start communicating and exchanging ideas. But the core objective of SpinBook is its powerful search engine inside with the capability to retrieve information extended to any type of document that is loaded into the system. So you can search about what kind of technology you can find in this. And then this is done by another form, and that's then filling the form, where the researcher or the enterprise can enter and feel what is the expertise, and what is the innovation, and what is the patent that he has developed. It can also add some multimedia files there, like documents, videos, whatever related to the patent that he has done. So we are knowing exactly who does what and where. And then I would say that, but the sole prerogative of SpinBook is that it can also provide a summary sheet, this sheet, in which the researchers decide to specify in more detail the appropriate potentiality of the results. Such information, for obvious reasons, are confidential and have been collected in a special section of SpinBook and appear logged to the consultation. To access the full reading of this tab, users can get in touch directly with the researcher via a private message. And in this case, the software foresees that there will be the one that owns the idea gives access to the one that asked for it. And then this is accessible to the other user, and then the collaboration can start the discussion. So, in conclusion, we need to provide we provide the tool in order to give our technology to the ones that are interested in for this. And we are provided on the other side this heavy heritage that I have described you before. So, the acquisition of new technologies of paramount importance for the European SMEs, which usually can only invest limited resources in the innovation. Moreover, it is crucial to promote strong interactions between public research and the industry through related figures as investors and intermediaries. Therefore, SpinBook main result will have to concretize into a real European knowledge community in the field of cultural heritage, like a place of meeting and sharing between the main groups involved, as well as a progressive space of aggregation of any stakeholders working in the process of production and utilization of innovation. So, SpinBook is already published there, and now you can see the link there. So join it, and now we will start filling it with companies, patents, mainly starting from the users of Hyperion project, and then we will see how it will go. So thank you very much.
We can squeeze Michelle in.
Stay in the middle.
I'm going to stand here and you can share there's enough microphones now, I think. And I think I'm right in saying these microphones get picked up by the camera, but not to the audience. So it's not a bad room actually for projecting. We have about 10 minutes assigned to questions and hopefully answers. Does anybody want to kick off with a question for any of our speakers? And if not, I'm going to get us going.
I have for Michelle.
You have a question?
Yes.
Go for it.
In the last project that you have shown, what are this is technical, but I want to ask, what is the dimensions of the various layers, if you know?
Of the various
layers.
The various layers, yes. They are about micrometers layers. The layer of the embedded nanoparticles is about 200 nanometers in thickness. And thanks to the efficiency of the Rutherford backscattering spectrometry, we are able to measure exactly with a certain certainty, of course, but these different layers.
Can I just ask some general questions about to Michelle and to Antonio about the three labs, so MoLab, ArchLab, and Fixed Lab. Just can you talk a little bit about the process of how decisions are made about who gets access to which instrumentation? Michelle, do you want to start off with the Fixed Lab?
My laboratory gives access to the three MoLab, ArchLab, and Fixed Lab. And each to get access to that, you have to fill a proposal, and as Antonio has mentioned, there are calls twice a year, and these proposals are evaluated by peer review panels, one for each access, and if accepted, the applicant will will enter in contact with the access provider, and they will have the possibility to find a date where the MoLab can go to the work of art, when the applicant can come to the archives in the different different centers, or when the applicant can come with these objects, with these artifacts, to be analyzed either in Hungary or in France for Fixed Lab.
Yes, there is a panel for the examination, for the peer review. This is usually 3 people, and nobody from the providers of the service is part of the panel, but very often we have to say the prerequisite if the proposal is feasible. And as he said, everything is then to the grant of the European Union. MoLab is the only one infrastructure which goes the other way around. The European community is paying for the use, for the operators, not for the users. And that was very difficult. I was in the committee at the beginning, and they say, but we do not have the form. We have the form to pay the users, not the operators. And then the second big question was, how much does it cost, MoLab, to be a European infrastructure? Because usually the infrastructure are very, very expensive, neutron, synchrotron, and hard to convince, but they were convinced that not just the hardware was important, but the software, I mean the professionals, were unique, and that make the infrastructure unique, and then European infrastructure.
And it's probably different for each of the 3 services, but do you think the amount of time or funding allocated is about right? I mean, are we getting the right amount of applicants to projects being accepted, or is it too competitive, or is it too easy? How is it sort of working out?
The applicants are helped by an access board.
Right.
That means they can, if they wish to write a proposal, they have to be, if they want, they can enter in contact with the access board, and they will be counseled. They will have counsel from the access board in order to reach the exact time. For that.
Right.
So there is an help desk to facilitate the proposal, but replying to your questions, I would say that there is a very good compromise among the 3 different services. Never we get very few proposals, but it's a right equilibrium, I would say.
Jürgen, I have a question for you as well. I'm always intrigued with these projects that try to pull together and we call it best practice or whatever it is, where you're trying to get different groups who probably very established ways of working, and you're trying to get them all to kind of adopt one methodology. I mean, is it too soon to say in practice the ease of that happening or not? Do you find people are open to that, seeing the benefit, or people tend to kind of dig their heels in and say, my way's the best?
I think you already answered it. It is difficult to find common grounds in some places and convince each other that that's the way to do it. Sharing is also a difficult issue in this. How much do you share, and how well do you do it? Talking about this, the founder of the Carlsberg Brewery in the 19th century, when he developed a good gist, he went out in Europe and offered it to all the other breweries in Europe so we could have a good competition on who can make the best beer based on the same formula. And that is a very generous way of doing it. And for instance, the Carlsberg Foundation also expects that any research result that comes out of the research that they fund will be public accessible immediately, as it is. So that will set new standards, and I think more and more foundations have this request, which means that we are obliged to coordinate our actions to make it interpretable for other parties.
Joe?
One of the parts criteria is looking, you mentioned by a couple of people looking at a grounds database. Part of trying to compare them is to be able to look at how different people photograph cross-sections. So a number of people photograph the same cross-sections, and a number of institutions have changed their photographic procedure through the comparison of how everyone else did it. So when people can see a clear benefit, how an improvement in process, I think people are willing to change. It's only when perhaps there isn't a clear indication of why one approach is an improvement than the other, then you will get
Sure.
mindset.
And just, I'm being reminded by the benefit, anyone speaking down here, if you're going to say something a bit longer than a few words, come up here, because we don't have it on camera, but if I can paraphrase very, very quickly, in the term, in the grounds project that you were, was presented very quickly, and will come up later, no doubt about it. Joe Padfield here found that when there was a real need for photographing in a different way to compare grounds, it actually happened quite quickly. But you also have to adopt one method, don't you? So it's kind of, do you end up, maybe this is a political discussion, I'm not sure. I'm just intrigued at how it actually works in practice.
It depends on how simple the changes need to be.
Yeah, okay. Was there another hand up here?
Well,
Rocco.
I'm very curious to, because Spinbook is something like Facebook.
No, yeah.
No, but
Well,
it is so
I can-
stupid, the question, that I can stand up for years.
I'll repeat it. Yes.
So everybody can see you.
Spinbook is like Facebook.
Yes, yes. No, I'm very curious. I forgot to ask for this question.
Internally.
Yeah,
Yes.
when we met in Lisbon. How do we control that we don't have fake profile on Spinbook? Because I dream to have some equipment, for example, and I'm going to invent the equipment that I dreamed for the rest of my life, and I would include this dream through a company, a fake company, and put the company into the Spinbook. It is a no-sense question, I understand, but I mean, it has to be filled with something which is real, which is connected to the reality. How can we be sure that what is inserted is the reality?
Let me just repeat the question for the camera. The very brief version of the question was, how do we prevent fake identities appearing on Spinbook, whether it's a company or another sort of profile? George.
In the entrance form, there are 4 people that will be a committee in order to assess what is getting into the system. So up to there, we cannot do any more. Then we can understand, I suppose, sometimes if something is, now we have all the capabilities. When we have an email or a contact point, insert it by Googling it several times, you can have an idea if something is fake or something important. So there will be this committee in order to make this check initially, and then we will decide if we are going to leave the profile or communicate with this guy.
We'll take one more. Do you want to come up, Joe, if it's going to be a long, because this is a bit strange. Everyone can hear the question and I'll repeat it. And I think we'll make this the last question, right, Phil? Yeah. Come on, yeah.
Hello. I was just going to say that people can apply for more than one access at the same time. And sometimes if people are putting together a project which makes use of more than one access, that can be quite beneficial. And the other thing to say is that members of Hyperion can't apply for these accesses. So it's all for people outside of the project. So it's not that we can all apply for our own accesses and it's all really great. It's actually for other people. So the purpose of these sort of presentations is trying to get other people to make applications to Hyperion because we can't apply for our own accesses.
Yes,
But all within Europe, right, Joe, at the moment?
Yeah.
As far as I understand, yes.
You see, a transnational access, you cannot apply from that infrastructure which is in your country. For instance, in Italy, you cannot apply for the MOLAB, Italian MOLAB, because the access, as in all the European projects, is a transnational access.
Great. Well, there are no more hands up. We're going to take a quick break. 15 minutes or, well, in a minute, yes. 15 minutes is good. We're going to say a few things. But first, please thank our fantastic panel for this afternoon.
My name is Barbara Berry. I'm head of the Scientific Research Department, and I'm standing in for Emiliano Degli Innocenti. Unfortunately, Emiliano has a family health emergency, and our thoughts are with him at this time. I know he would have loved to have been here with us, and I also know that I won't come even close to being able to give you as much information as he is, as he has at his fingertips. But I have a great panel here, which will help me work on all of this. But before we get to the panel, I just want to talk a little bit about some of Emiliano's work. He is one of those rare people who works not only interdisciplinarily, but also truly multidisciplinarily. He's trained as a medievalist, and he has worked to build a platform for the digital infrastructure of research, digital research in humanities, and it's called Sendari. And that stands for, and I have it written down somewhere. Pardon me. Maybe somebody can find which piece of paper did I write this on. It's the Collaborative European Digital Archive Infrastructure. And in fact, there are some pages in there that have, quote, technical documentation, unquote. And that is really filled with information and the kinds of words that I can't get my head around, like light F and pineapple, RDF converters, NERD, that one I do know, and CCAN. All of these kinds of words that describe what you need to know in order to build this kind of infrastructure. And I can't really get there, but I think that web page shows it very, that documentation shows that very well. Sendari is like Daria, which you've heard about, and Ariadne, and Parthenon, and the new Digilab. These are all pan-European initiatives that are being developed as part of the infrastructure to promote digital research in humanities. But today I have a great panel that's going to talk about some of the nitty-gritty of doing that, really talking about where the rubber meets the road on this, and about what kinds of content we're trying to prepare for these to be loaded into these kinds of infrastructures, and some of the challenges of not only the foundation for the infrastructure, but also the layers on top that we will be interfacing with. Since everybody's bios are in the program, I'm not going to read those. And also because we're going to change the format up a little bit here. I'm going to ask all the panelists to speak for just 5 minutes. So we'll go through everybody's project and perceptions. And then I'll come back with specific questions that are tying out some of the common threads in the challenges that each person is is describing in their effort and their endeavor. And then I'll open up the floor to you. And as you heard, that there is no microphone for you except these ones. So if you have a question or a comment to make, there are plenty of seats up in the front row. So as you're thinking of your questions, if you're going to want to ask some, please come and sit in the front row and you can share the microphones with us. So my panel starts, I'll introduce everybody. It's Merv Richard, who's Chief of Conservation at the National Gallery of Art. He's my boss. Next to him is Joe Padfield from National Gallery London, Cecilia Frossanini, who's Vice Director of the Opificio delle Pietre Dure in Florence, Vanella France, who's here at the Library of Congress, and Michelle Derrick, who's at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. You'll notice that we're mostly museum-based people, something that was noted and alluded to this morning, that a lot of what goes on in cultural heritage is happening in museums in America. But with that, I think I'll start at the far end and ask Merv to tell us about his forays into digital heritage research.
Okay, if you can't hear me, then raise your hand. I'll try to speak loudly. Like most of you in this room, I actually sit here with multiple hats on. The National Gallery actually has a very long history of doing collaborative projects, both scientific research as well as in conservation with institutions around the world. And we have fostered that. Now, there's a caveat here. On the flip side, there's a long tradition, particularly in America, but maybe equally in Europe, of yes, you collaborate with your collaborators and you share information, but there's a long history of conservators not wanting to share information with a much larger community for a variety of reasons. That's not why we're here today. We're beyond that now, thankfully. For the purpose of collaboration, many of us have long felt the need to share data much more extensively than is possible through just these mutual collaborations. As a result, the National Gallery, in partnership with other museums, including some of you in this room, has embarked with support of the Mellon Foundation, and Allison is here today. I'm sure you all know Allison, or I hope so. But anyway, we have been working for the last 7 years on something called Conservation Space, which some of you are familiar with. And Conservation Space is directed towards the management and preservation of the documents that we generate in the course of conservation, as well as in conservation science. And the purpose of it is to get away from filing cabinets filled with pieces of paper that typically requires someone's memory to remember, oh yes, we did such and such with such and such, 10 years ago. And to get into a situation where the information is much more readily accessible, and by accessible, that can be to your local conservation community, that can be to the entire public if one wishes. So with Conservation Space, we looked for the development of a digital tool that would, number one, facilitate the day-to-day working practices of conservators, because if there's anything that I've figured out over the years, if you don't create something that people actually want or need to use, then the likelihood of their actually using it is somewhat reduced. And with Conservation Space, the objective was to find a way of creating, storing, searching, as well as sharing all of the records that we are producing. And when I say records, this is both in the form of written documents as well as images. And so I'm happy to say that Conservation Space is live. I mean, it's real now. It's not just a concept. We've put it into production at the National Gallery of Art at the moment, and we are sort of doing a slow rolled out use of the software at the moment. It is web-based, which means that it lives in the cloud. It is the information on a document-by-document level can be made accessible to user groups that you define. So in other words, you can restrict it solely to yourself. You can restrict it to people collaborating on a project. The people who collaborate can be in the National Gallery or anywhere in the world, as long as they have user access. And if you want to share it with the whole world on a document-by-document basis, then you can do that as well very easily. The scientific department is actually one of the most rapid, I think, adopters of starting to incorporate the scientific data into the system. And when I say scientific data, that means that it's in the form of data tables and in the form of things like images of graphs. We are not trying to address proprietary software that instruments develop. This is where we are, and we feel that this is a huge stride forward in terms of collaboration, which is what this meeting's all about. And look forward to sort of future interaction with all of you.
Thanks, Murph.
Good afternoon. I'm from the UK, just one of the non-American people. And, two people from the UK, EU. I trained originally as a chemist, and then I trained as a paintings conservator. And then I've spent the last 16 years working with computers. A lot of people working in cultural heritage work with computers. It's quite a normal thing, whether that's just answering emails or whether that's writing reports or typing up questions or looking at pictures. And a lot of the work that we're trying to do at the moment is to see how we can capture that effort that's already put in and make more of it. So as Murph said, Conservation Space is looking at trying to simplify the administrative structure that already exists when you type in Word documents. But instead of saving them in one place on your computer, you save them in a place that other people can see them and managers can organize them. So it's a question of, if we come up with a beautiful computing system that allows you to do all of the things you'd like to do, but all of the work to do that is on top of the work you already have to do, it doesn't matter how good the system is, no one's going to use it. You just don't have time. So in Hyperion, I'm responsible for Work Package 8, which is looking at developments in digital documentation. The budget is good, it's not huge, so we're not looking to build systems, but what we're looking to do is to test systems. And as soon as Merv releases Conservation Space, we're going to have a play with it. But it's looking to test ideas of how people actually do things. So we're looking at small tools that are being developed to help speed up individual little jobs. And as I said, people use computers all the time anyway. But the thing is that there are large numbers of IT professionals looking for projects in universities to do, and then there's a lot of cultural heritage scientists struggling to answer questions because of the limitations of the software they have.
I'm not sure I understand.
How appropriate!
Yes, that is apt.
Go Siri. You need to speak more clearly, Joe.
Sorry, it's the accent.
Make the tool more simple.
Yeah, but that's lost my train of thought now, Mark. So the question about is one of the first tasks in Work Package 8 is making practical solutions. So actual things that people can use, actual entities. So you mentioned a couple of those terms that are on the Sindari sort of website that you didn't like RDF and the others. And there's a lot of informatics that can be hidden underneath pieces of software to allow people to do more. So there's an awful lot of very clever technology sitting underneath Conservation Space that as a user you'd never have to see and care about. But then a lot more is possible with the information underneath. So what we're looking to do is and the first task is to provide practical solutions to actually show things working and to show people how they could do them themselves. The second part of the Work Package 8 and Hyperion is to look at the descriptions. How do we describe this information? How do we connect it together? So most of you will be able to explain to me what it is you do and why you do it and what it is. If you then had to explain it to a computer in a way that the computer could then connect to other systems, it becomes very difficult because you have to be very, very specific and consistent. So that's what the second task is looking at. The third task is looking at the notion of data formats. Is that as we store more and more of this information together, how can we make sure that people will be able to reuse it tomorrow and in 10 years' time and in 20 years' time? So as people have said, we're not looking to replicate the very quality pieces of software that are developed with instruments that are purchased, but to be able to look at that data and to be able to reuse the data later once these instruments no longer work and once the software is no longer available is becoming more and more important as we're generating huge amounts of data in some of these new techniques that are becoming available. So that's the third task. And then the final task within Work Package 8 is actually to produce resources of information that people can use and move forward. So it's been discussed already. One of the first ones is looking at a grounds database. So we're going to try and look at building a database of ground samples and explain how they all connect together, how they relate to the different artists and different institutions where the information is stored. But we're also going to try and build that on a fairly generic model so that that same database structure can be used for other resources of information. So how it can be used for quantitative analysis of Renaissance bronzes is going to be another one that's going to be looked at. But we are looking at practical solutions to doing these things. So conservation space, and I won't go into actual numbers, had a much bigger budget than we have within the particular work package we're dealing with. There's another very interesting project which is hopefully just about to be released called Research Space, which is going to be allowed to do different jobs to do with complex cultural heritage information. And again, we're looking to make use of these and use them and test them within Hyperion rather than try and write them again. Because a lot of people are working on similar projects, and ideally through communication, it'd be great to make sure that we can each use each other's work to move forward rather than continually replicating the stuff that goes forward. So there are lots of resources out there. People are working on them. There's lots of really good work being done. We're trying to improve the communications and provide real worked examples so that Siri can understand what it is we're actually doing. And it's often a lot of these complex projects are done, the project comes to an end, there's a very shiny product at the end of it, everyone really likes it, and then there's a new project starts up and they go, well, we're not going to use that because we don't know how it works, and well, we're not sure we can do. So they start again and build it again. If we can make sure that these tools that are being developed are building blocks, we can move forward. And the golden rule is make sure you can get your data out. Actually, it doesn't really matter what the software is. As long as you can get your data in and you can get your data out, you can move on to whatever's going to happen next. So these are the things we're looking at within Work Package 8 for the Hyperion project.
Thanks, Joe. And Cecilia, maybe you'll talk about some of these issues from a slightly different perspective.
Yes, always a different perspective, because I feel at a certain point always out of context, because I am an art historian, mainly working with scientists or conservators. And so sometimes I feel like a child of a lesser God, because it's very difficult that people trust on me, people from the scientific point of view. It's very difficult to make me reliable from their point of view. And also when I come back to my original field, to my original background, and discuss with the traditional academic art historians, I am always the child of a lesser God, because of course I mixed my original great tradition, God-given experience and scholarship for very trivial kind of studies. So this is very interesting in some, from some point of view, is a continuous challenge. But this is also the challenge of the great change that Italy experienced, especially in the field of conservation. Because for many, many decades, in the last century especially, the art historians were not really involved in conservation. But some of them, very few of them, and generally speaking, they were all involved in the research regarding the museum, the exhibition, and so on. And also there was a very low-level consideration for the conservation field. Conservators were considered more like the craftsmanship of art. They were not considered a high-level position, and it lasted for a long time. So I think that in some ways this idea of art separated from science affected the development of also the material art history, which is very, very behind in Italy. In our experience at the Opificio delle Pietre, we have had this pioneeristic position because we have always thought to be a sort of Italian branch of the fog experience in Boston. Also because one of our founding fathers, Ugo Procacci, was very close to all the people of the fog who founded the school of the fog tradition. But we were very distant from the rest of the world. I think that in times, of course, in these last decades, these gaps are being filled, are already filled, and now we share our expertise and we participate to all the major projects. For example, in the case of Hyperion, I think that is very important the choice that the Opificio made to appoint 3 different people as a representative in the frame of the different task leaders of Hyperion. So we have a scientist, a conservator, and an art historian, which is a sort of coronation of all this story that I have tried to sum up during this short talk. I think that I have benefited a lot as an art historian from this continuous experience and this continuous sharing with the scientists. Most of the more modern accomplishments of art history cannot be so grounded, so based on the truth, in my opinion. And especially what I like very much is the fact that now we can deny many of the urban legends that were at the basis of many construction of the academic art historians. So I think that this has been my personal experience, but also a general change in Italy for the profession of art history.
Thanks. Vanilla, tell us about your initiatives here.
So I wanted to, can you hear me okay at the back? So I wanted to start by sort of going back to Professor Pozzo talking about STEM to STEAM this morning, because we're hearing this theme come through, and I really adhere very strongly to the fact that we need to integrate the humanities and the scientific data together because they're not separate, they actually rely on each other. And then also in terms of GLAM, everyone keeps talking about museums, and I kind of want to put my finger up and say, no, I'm a library, but we do science here too. So we have galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. Historic houses, all of these institutions, I think we need to think a little bit more broadly in terms of our concept, because the academic institutions, many of them also have museums and libraries, and I very much want to pick up on Luca's point this morning where he talked about data not just being the captured document, but the physical collection. And I'll come back to that at the end, but we have many libraries and museums who have physical collections, reference collections that are being shared. And so, I think that comes back to what is data, that both physical and digital are components of the same. And as part of that too, what are archives and repositories? Because the repositories of reference collections that when people retire are getting thrown out, and we all just cringe in horror when that happens, really are critical parts of our institutions that we need to be preserving. There's many institutions with lots of different initiatives, and I very much like what Joe was saying, that we want to be interoperable and we really want to build upon each other's initiatives. So if I do a small piece that actually is useful for something else, I'd really, rather than just, I'd like my system to be agnostic and actually interact with everyone else's. And so we've heard about conservation space, research space, there's Cameo, Arches, Disco, Class D, which I'll talk about in a moment, but also a little bit broader. So I don't know how many of you know about SHARE, which is a partnership between the Association of Research Libraries and the Institute for Museum and Library Studies and the Sloan Foundation through the Centre for Open Science. So I think these are initiatives we also need to be engaging with and not reinventing when they're already looking at ways of sharing that data and trying to make that open. Delighted to have Cliff Lynch here from the Coalition for Networked Information, and that's something also we need to really look at what other institutions we should be engaging with as well. Because that allows us to use and reuse our data more effectively, because if we all have data sets and, as we've heard, they're being used for one purpose, we often don't know what a different audience might want to use them for, and I think that's something we really need to push on a lot more, to look at the other audiences that might be interested in what we're doing. In terms of the collaboration for sharing data, and Joe and I will talk more about this tomorrow, but part of it really comes down to the institutional policy and at what level management supports that sharing and what level of sharing that is. And there may be different models for really looking at what type of data and how you can share that level of data. I just wanted to finish up with talking about Class D, another acronym, the Centre for Library Analytical Scientific Samples here at the library. We both have physical reference materials of all of the types of materials we have in our collections and have been linking that to a web accessible database of all of the data that links back to that original object or sample. So part of that has been trying to drive ourselves crazy by extracting metadata from proprietary instruments and encouraging the manufacturers that we really don't want to steal their software, we just want to extract the data. So really looking at what are those open sustainable file formats that we can do, that we can extract that from, what is the higher level metadata we need for people to be able to share and actually engage with that database more effectively, and then pulling that out of that non-proprietary format. It came up this morning, or this afternoon, about the verification and validation of the accuracy of the data. So part of this is actually ensuring that there are experts who are expert in a certain type of data analysis. I haven't told Michelle that she's going to be pulled on yet. That would actually be verifying the accuracy of that data to make sure before it's put out there that that has been validated. And then in terms of assuring that we don't have fake institutions created, that there would be member partners who would have to engage and be part of that, like an MOU or an agreement, and then any other researchers from that institution would have the an expirable account that would go through that institution. So one thing I'll talk about a lot more tomorrow is this sharing of reference collections, and I know a lot of us have talked about the fact that we can't all have all of the same types of materials, but it's been wonderful working with Michelle because we've actually been capturing data on some of our Forbes pigments and pushing that into the Cameo collection. So I think really a more coherent approach, which we're all advocating for, and seeing how much we can use of each other's initiatives to really get that global perspective, as Luke has been pushing, and to move us all forward to the next steps.
Michelle, maybe you just had the introduction on Cameo there. Maybe you can talk about that and your development of an online digital resource.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm going to talk about something a little different because this is Cameo, the Conservation and Art Materials Encyclopedia Online. That has been online for over 16 years. So, and because I've worked on it for about 20 years, I'm going to brag. We actually made the cover page for Chemistry International September 2016. So, and we have, in the month of November, we had 11,200 users. That's independent IP addresses. We have about 60 editors, 23 of which are in Europe. And Cameo now resides on MediaWiki software. So I think what I'm supposed to talk about, though, is how did we get to this point? How did it actually develop? So the main thing, I thought I was talking loud. Okay, the main thing I think is that we were a single institution that was focused on a single subject. Now, our subject is fairly broad. Materials used in art or used in conservation, or materials that can affect art, so that can be pigments, coatings, adhesives, formaldehyde, insects. But we had a topic and we had an institution. We had several people that were allowed to work on it. And we received generous grants. So we received an initial grant from the National Center for Preservation Technology and Training. We received one from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, IMLS. We've received one from the Mellon Foundation and one from the Crest Foundation. Each of these grants, in general, helped us migrate the data from an older platform onto a new platform, but it also allowed us to do some data addition and alteration and changes. So we went from FileMaker to Microsoft Access to SQL to a proprietary software that we were stuck in for about 10 years and had trouble getting our data out of. And now we're on MediaWiki. And let's see. One of the most important things that happened to Cameo was our collaboration with Europe. And this was started by the dedication of Jean-Louis Boutain, who contacted me in 2005 and set up a working group with EU Artec. And Jean-Louis Boutain pushed people because of the goal of transnational access. We thought one of the most important things was to add foreign language synonyms to the English language records so that those could be searched on, so that anyone could get access to the records. And after EU Artec ended, then we became a working group in Charisma. And that gets us to where we are now. I did some statistics at the beginning of Charisma. We had 48% of the users were outside the US, and now, as of November 2016, 63% of the users are outside of the US. And in November of 2016, we were used in 139 countries. So I very much have enjoyed working on this.
Well, Michelle, that's great. Now, this is an example of if you build it, they will come. But that has been one of the questions that's been raised by people funding and people working on developing research, infrastructures for digital research. And so if your 11,000 users are from all over, do you know if they're using it for high school papers, for technical art history, for painting?
I have no idea. So one of the things about Cameo is that when it started, there wasn't much competition out there. However, now there are lots of databases that are very specific for painting materials, for adhesives, for stones, et cetera. So one of the things we're doing is linking to those different databases. And I check the people that are linking to Cameo. And one of the people, one of the museums is the Metropolitan Museum. They have their wonderful art historical database that's phenomenal. And they actually link to Cameo for specific information on the materials that are used in the works of art.
Great. So maybe, Joe, I can just ask you a question about the Hyperion initiatives. Have you, in your work package, said who your audience should be?
Yes and no.
Oh.
Because that particular work package, although one of the tasks is looking at building resources, most of the work is actually building process. How do we actually do jobs? The audience for the actual resources at the end are primarily aimed towards cultural heritage scientists. So people actually wanting to do research rather than people just having to explore it for fun. The intention is that the resources will be open to the wider public, but they're not being written in such a way to engage with. It's just simply it's a different level of resource that would be required to actually produce that.
Merv, conservation space, on the other hand, is written for a specific audience in
Right.
its concept.
Well, I mean, in terms of concept, I mean, conservation space is being developed to solve a problem in institutions, which is to facilitate the actual work processes or workflow of practicing conservators and conservation scientists. Now, when I say that, in essence, though, what we're developing is a document management system that is intended for museums and libraries. And in fact, some of the biggest users may end up being conservators and libraries. So from that standpoint, it is solving a specific problem, but then when I say that, we already have curators at the National Gallery who are interested, oh, can I use that as a research tool? And the answer is yes. So it actually has expandability. And one thing to emphasize here, for those of you who are familiar with semantic approaches to database development, I mean, conservation space is built on top of open source, a significant open source platform. At the bottommost layer is something called Alfresco for the techies in the room, and then there's a platform on top of that that the company we're working with, CERMA, developed. But then it's a semantic database, and the advantage of the semantic approach is that the ability to now map to and interact with other databases is expanded in our view. And, you know, so you can link to many other databases.
You know, thinking of linking makes me think about librarians and archivists and finding resources. So I'm really glad that we have Fenella here. But I think one thing that these objects that are tools proliferate, our ability to discover them is going to be challenged. But one of the ways that this can help be helped is by the linking, and I'm interested in hearing how much linking is going on. But Fenella, perhaps I could ask you, do we need to have standards if we're going to be linking among databases? Or are there ways to get around that, or should we think about that now?
So it's come up a few times today that, you know, will people do what you want them to do? And I think the challenge is that whenever I started this initiative about 9 years ago, and I asked all my colleagues at the time, what do you want to see in this database? And basically they said, put something up there because we don't really know until we see something. So that wasn't really particularly helpful, but I think you really need to start from a standard, and that what we have done is trying to standardize the approach of the open access, the standardized file formats, extracted metadata, engaging people who are expert in different instrumentation, but also then trying to make sure that the structure is robust enough to add in additional fields when people suddenly say, wait a minute, there's another way of describing this that we can now do. We have a new instrument, can we add that in? So part of it is that I really do think we do need to try and standardize, because otherwise one of the challenges we all have is that being such a multidisciplinary field, when one person says data, someone else hears something different. And I think we've all had that discussion where we're using exactly the same words, and at the end of the discussion, the 5 people have gone in 12 different directions. So one of the challenges is how much we can have some sort of shared terminology while still recognizing that there are nuances within that. But yes, in order to share, we do need to do that, but the data needs to be in a format that is usable to that user. So for example, I may be using something in a completely different way to Joe or Michelle, but as long as that data is in a structure that they can extract and reuse, then I think that's the critical component.
So along those lines, Cecilia, the kind of information that you would want to pull from a digital repository or asset, X-radiographs, cross-section?
Yes, everything.
Everything. She
Everything.
doesn't want too much, right? But some of these files are going to be huge, right?
Yeah.
How do you how do you guide an art historian to looking at them on a digital database?
Here comes the problem of the education, especially in the university, I think. We are struggling, but I think that probably Rocco here is more is the
He'll talk
the key
tomorrow,
person
maybe, yes.
tomorrow to explain better this problem in the modern university regarding the conservation scientists, their key role as a sort of bridge between the traditional art historian and the traditional scientist. From my point of view, I think that we need to have a very important, at this point, it is very important to have a generation of teachers that try to train these new kind of figures, and this is very important. For example, in Florence, the University of Florence has a school of specialization for art historian, which is really a very formal, very academic, but they have selected some specific courses. One is called scientific diagnostic for art historian, which is very nice. It's a sort of usum Delphini, as you could say. So you know what usum Delphini was, of course. It was trying to teach to the son of the King of France, whose name, whose formal title was the Delfino, of course, and try to explain them in a more easier way, the very basic of all the subjects for the culture. So I think that this idea that comes in our university to have, for example, diagnostics for art historian is something interesting, because you are not aimed to explain them all the principle of physics or chemistry or whatever, but to try to teach them which are the questions and which are the more probable investigation that can give some answers to these questions. So I think that this is a good idea, and this is also probably the idea that we could keep in mind when trying to build this linking among all the different databases. So you need a different users.
I think we might need new librarians too, to help the art historian going to the library to discover these tremendous assets. Because so far as I can tell, some of these are available already.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to know where to look. But in terms of training, I wasn't actually thinking of getting the conversation onto training quite yet. But if we can just stay on that for a moment. Merv and Joe, you both trained as conservators, so you had to have some science. And I think both of you actually came from with science as undergraduates rather than art history as undergraduates and then picking up science as a conservator. But if you can cast your minds back, how difficult was it to have one class with some people with a science background and some people with none to have the same class? I mean, how do we need to solve this problem? Who can be the trainers for the art historians?
I remember people breaking out into tears
Okay.
trying to explain certain aspects of science. I think the difficulty with this type of training is that you don't necessarily want to turn an art historian into a chemist or an IT professional. You want to give the art historian enough understanding to know what questions they should be asking, or to know who they should be asking the questions of. I think for university students, when you tell them you're an art historian, you need to go to a chemistry class, ensuring that they understand that the purpose of the chemistry class is to allow them to ask questions rather than for them to become a chemist is quite important. And having a clear understanding of what people are trying to learn. So I would have thought for an art historian, the best way to get information together on a particular artist would be to get every single object ever created by that artist into one room, to gather together all of the historical examinations that have been done of all of those objects into the one room, and then all of the specialists who did all of that work into the one room, all at your beck and call. and with a few people to interpret the different languages that were done. Now, theoretically, you could come up with a computer model to do that, but that's kind of where we're aiming towards. And I would say that a big issue here is trust, because if we're looking at pulling information from lots of different places, you need to know where it's come from and that you can trust it. We've got a lot of stuff in the main press at the moment about fake news, which is slightly more severe, but people need to know if an examination has been done, where was it done? Do you feel that that's an okay sort of interpretation? Because people aren't generally going to be able to understand all of the raw data underneath, even if it's available.
That was the case before it was digital too, though, don't you agree?
Yeah.
It's just that now with the proliferation of access, we
You
have
just
to be
have
more
more questions.
careful.
That's
Yes.
the difficulty. I mean,
Yeah.
instead of sort of spending 20 years exploring an archive, you may spend a week exploring 4. So you're going to be hit by so much more information. Understanding that you can make quick decisions about what you found can be quite important.
Thanks. Michelle, you have Cameo, which started off, you said, with a rather broad remit. But can you talk a little bit about the data landscape and how starting from there might have changed how you decide what you're curating in your archive, your digital archive?
Sure. So at the point we started Cameo, we were taking information from the books on our library shelves and putting it into a digital format because the books were being submitted to me and I was putting it into the format. I had a standardized structure that I used for every single record.
So wait, can I just say that goes back to your fidelity issue. These were books, Michelle, that you trusted.
Yes.
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 Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it's documented still in the Cameo records where
Yes, I've
where the
noticed
data
that.
sources, what data sources were used to generate the information in that record. And when I found data sources that had discrepant information, it's actually recorded there. So, because I found them. And I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Well, how did it grow? It grew from just taking the traditional kinds of material from books,
Right.
and spread out.
Exactly. So the first database for Cameo was textual only. When we got it into the SQL format, then we were allowed to add images. So we actually had an image collection specialist that was able to take a lot of micrographs himself. He pulled all the MFA object pictures he could off and added them there. He searched the web for other pictures and put them in with credits. And we expanded to that. And then we started putting data in. So we have IR data, Raman data, X-ray diffraction, X-ray fluorescence, polarized light images, anything we could get for the materials. And some of that came from our conservation records, some from our scientific records, others from other people submitting them. So.
And Vanilla, along those lines with the Class D, is that to try to help fidelity of the digital part of the content? I mean, how do we also make sure that we're not getting fuzzy spots on the X-radiographs that Cecilia's cohorts?
So it's a combination, I think of what we've always done with the analog and then the expert, and Michelle's intimately involved with iRug as well, but going from that sort of model where you have an expert who will be responsible for a specific instrumental technique, so that this does not look right, and it gets sent back. So that combination of both, but also just allowing for more discoverability, because I think that everyone's doing so much work, and every time I hear about a different initiative, it's like, I wish that I had 3 weeks to just even shut myself in a room and look at some of these initiatives. But there's so much data out there that we just don't know and we're not linking to, and I think that's a critical point that's coming through, that there's a lot of data there that's not being shared, it's not being saved, funding stops, and it just disappears somewhere, and that's where I think we need to capture that before we lose a lot of that historic data.
Now, on that note, I'd like to open up the conversation to all of you. And As I said, there's a microphone right here. You can come and sit in seats as you're thinking of the questions, or you can shout out and I'll transmit the information into the microphone. Excellent.
I can shout. I think I've
You
got
can
that.
stand near the microphone.
Near this
Here,
one.
or this. Stand near that one.
Hi, my questions, I guess it's for the group, but particularly for Fenella and Michelle. I'm interested in the accessibility of data. We have some systems like the IRUG database, which holds infrared and Raman spectral data that is only available by membership. You contribute and then you're able to use. And you have to be an institution to use these. I used to work as a private conservator and I did not have access to these databases. And I make a point that I try to get my students membership so that they, as they go through their career and they move from place to place, will always have access to these kinds of systems. I personally believe that we might curate the data we put up, but that we should freely let people use it freely however they want, just as they would use a book. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that and your experiences.
Well, I can simply say that Cameo is open to the public. Anyone can access it. It's free of charge, and there never will be a charge. The MFA is committed to keeping it accessible.
And with Class D, that's the same. I talked about the fact that we would start with member partners, because we want to engage and encourage other people to put their data in. So that was the place to start with that. But it will be a registered user, and so there's no cost for that. People are not required, but we really wanted to start with partners so that we would get more than just our data, because there's a lot of much more interesting data out there. So to answer your question, the data set of whatever that is will be available and can be combined. So for one sample, we'll have the XRF, the XRD, the UVs, all of that linked to the one object or sample.
Joe.
I was just going to say that there are lots of sort of databases that are created that for various reasons do need to be protected or closed to a certain extent. I think one of the very important things to do about that is to record why they're closed and if there's a time limit on the closing. I think some of the projects like IRUG, they were essentially closed to begin with to ensure people contributed. I think at a certain point, perhaps they could be then made open again, because it's reached that critical mass. That's where you put that type of data. That's where you would go for that type of data. Yeah. So it's if people can access that information, then that's great. But I think to allow people to start off with a plan in a slightly more closed environment helps people with the engaging with that to begin with. But there should be a time limit on it. I mean, once after so many years have gone by, why can't other people use it? And I think if that type of thing can be captured, that could be really important. And often people end up doing stuff because that's the way we do it. So yes, it's closed because it's closed, and it's sort of a circular argument. And if it's closed because it's closed, then why can't we open it? So I would agree with you, the notion that if information isn't actually of a secret or personal nature, then if it can be used, then great.
Mark, maybe you could, and I'll come back to Cecilia, just discuss that the structure of conservation space allows different levels of permissions.
Yeah, I mean, with conservation space, I mean, there are two aspects to this question. I mean, one is from the standpoint of sustainability, and since conservation space is intended to actually help with work processes, then while the software is made available freely in order to maintain the software into the future, there will have to be some kind of membership fee which is associated with just sustaining the software and continuing to develop it. But in terms of then who is made accessible, since on a document by document level and with the assignment of user roles, it means that you have the capability of opening up those documents to however broad a group you want. So that you're not making a decision from the onset about who can see what. You're deciding for this class of documents, the whole world can see it if they wish. And so that's where the flexibility in how you approach it can make a difference.
The part of the structure of the system allows that. And Cecilia, you wanted to weigh in.
Yes, I just wanted to point to the fact that in Italy we have a specific legislation about how this data can be accessible or not, because most of the works of art are property of the state. So there are specific, we are compelled to follow these rules. These rules are very old because usually they were set only considering the photographs, the traditional kind of photographs. But they assume that there should be an authorization all the time that you ask for data coming from different archives. So now all the database that pertain to research, to scientific investigation, and so on, are put in the same box like they were photographs, because there is no specific legislation about all these kind of analysis. And according to these laws, we need to ask for the authorization of the museum, of the church, or whatever, who is the owner of the paintings, despite the fact that the investigation are carried out by other, sometimes other institutions or universities or so on. So you need a great collection of authorization sometimes that makes things really, really difficult. So that's the reason most of these databases are just for being consulted, being read, being used, but you cannot really retrieve the original document. You cannot print an X-ray or whatever without asking for a formal authorization.
Yeah, it shows that we still are treating digital information sometimes the way we treated analog information. We haven't actually adjusted our thoughts. But I think that the permissions level that Merv talked about is a way to maybe help institutions deal with that. Fenella, you have some thoughts.
Yeah, and I just wanted to follow on from both the user role and the access, because one thing we put into place was the fact that while we are public domain, so we have to make everything accessible, but partners may not want to put all of their collections out there. And so each partner would have control of their collection to say, okay, this came from a specific donor, we want to just keep this for our in-house location, but this we will share. So there would be those sorts of levels that would allow people to decide at what point they make that accessible and how they do that.
One thing is clear to me is that if I have to say which is the priority in the data environment, it is clear to me that a lot of information are already available, and it has been said by all of us. Cameo is the kind of light in the morning that you can follow, and it is really enlightening. It is fantastic. There are databases. There are many different types of databases. Now, in my opinion, the discussion is useless. The discussion concerning how to make them working together, how you can link together, whether this can be done through the invention of another database. I mean, this is something that does not make me happy. What makes me happy is what Barbara was saying. Perhaps we need to train people on how to look for those information. I mean, I have many courses at the University of Bologna. One of the key courses, Analytical Chemistry for Cultural Heritage, which is 32 hours of frontal lesson and 18 hours of laboratory work. The first 6 hours of the 32 are just related with how to look through the website on the information that are already available on a given particular matter, such as malachite. We want to know everything about malachite. Where can we find this information? And then you teach them, you train them, regardless whether they are librarians or in this case they will be conservation scientists, first of all to look where to look, where to find this information, because they are already available. If you move in a paintings, it is very difficult to find the X-ray that Cecilia wants, because as she said, most of this information are have property rights, and so they are not public, not because they cannot be made public, but because there are laws behind that do not allow you to make it. So this information are frozen there within the institution. This is why the Arch Lab, transnational access, is becoming so important, because what they are looking for are of those information which are not available and probably will not be available because they are forced to stay where they are because of many reasons. Not the last one is that perhaps there are institutions that don't want to make their cross-section available to the others because they are, you know.
Theirs.
Theirs. because they are theirs. I mean, this is my job. I took a lot of time to do this job, and I don't want the others to be part of this game. So we have to consider all this, you know, cultural diversity, if you want, because it relates also with the different type of cultural diversity. So the key point is the accessibility of data, not how to structure the already available data in something else. How to make the accessibility a little bit more easy. This is my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Well, time will take care of that one. Time will take care of that. People will die off, you know.
Not really.
Not us, no, but you know.
The time.
And actually, if I could just talk to that, this is something that came up very strongly when we had the meeting in 2014, that we need a better communication platform and ways to actually link to all of these different initiatives, because, you know, I think there's so much going on that, you know, all these meetings that were being mentioned, and I think Luca was saying he got an invite to a meeting, you know, 2 days away. You know, how do we make this a little bit past the data, but if we don't know that a meeting is on, we don't know where that is. So I think that's another part that we need to think about, is how we communicate and link more effectively between all our institutions.
Another aspect of this is, I mean, a while ago you were asking the question about the fact that conservators come from different disciplines. So many have a background in art history or studio art with limited chemistry, or vice versa. And so there's a learning that takes place during the course of conservation training, where everybody has their strengths and weaknesses and everybody helps each other out. Now, one thing that is a bit of a problem when you look at people who are strictly studying art history, for example, is relatively few academic programs at the university level are emphasizing the technical aspects of art history that I'm aware of. I mean, it's gradually changing, I think, but this is an area where I think many art historians either enter the academic world or the curatorial world without having an introduction to the technical aspects of it in a very solid way anyway. And so they happen upon it because of personal interest or because of their experience wherever they are. So I think influencing the academic training of art historians is one way that we could influence the future. I think one thing that's very good is because we have become much more effective at presenting our information visually, that has really increased dramatically an interest in what many people are calling technical art history, because obviously reading tables of numbers does not go over well with many art historians. But if you can look at pictures or images that have been, you know, mapped to show you specific information about where's malachite in this particular painting, mapped on an image, or the dramatic increase in what we can do with hyperspectral and other.
Yeah, I think simple imaging tools like Photoshop have helped take us to that first step, and the more advanced digital tools that are being developed specifically for our use in layering multiple different kinds of technical information in a way that gives an image that an art historian like Cecilia can actually work through and decode has moved us significantly together over the past few years, which is a wonderful thing. People do say that vocabulary has been a great divide between the arts and the sciences, but I think it's not just vocabulary, it's also ways of thinking, and I think we should get into that. And before we go on with vocabulary, Jan has a question here.
It's more a remark as a question. I think for the what we call in the Netherlands the interested layperson, where malachite is in the picture, for instance, might also be very interesting. So not only for the art historians, but also for the really high educated lay people who say, oh, that's what I'm looking at. So Photoshop will be just one way of doing it. So that's my remark.
Okay, Joe, you're on the, while Joran's coming up, do you want to, are you, okay. All right, now we're getting everybody lined up. All right, Joe, you get to go first because you're on the panel, and then Luca, then Joran. And anybody else who wants to come and ask a question, you have to get in line.
I was just going to say, we need to remember that there's the potential for multiple different types of research happening at the same time. So if you have an art historian who's researching the use of a particular pigment, that's a particular job, there's a particular skill set involved in that. If you then have a scientist researching the analysis of a particular pigment, that's an entirely different form of research. You can then have a digital I don't know what the term, someone doing digital humanities who's exploring how you present information on that particular thing. There are a number of different things to do. And to sort of address Rocco's point beforehand, you spend sort of 6 hours training them to how to find these pigments.
How to find information related.
Yeah, but it's a question of how many times do you do that before you work out, just put it all in one place and then they can all find it. If you looked back 20 years ago, how long would it have taken them to find the same information? Now, it's not their research to make it more accessible, that's the thing. It's someone else's research to make it accessible. But if you've got a lot of informatics people doing research, if you effectively can say, it takes us 6 hours to do this, can you do it faster? Can we direct the research that's done by other people to make our research easier? And I think that's a tricky one, because often conservation science borrows from so many different fields, we can end up feeling it's our job to do everything, whereas that's not actually possible. Because we work in an interdisciplinary field, it's very good to be able to say, this is my area. It's not my job to do that, but it'd be really handy if someone else can do it. And then more we can gather these questions, these issues that are actually stopping people or slowing people down, we can help each other move forward.
It's true. Luca, you want to weigh in and ask a question?
Yes, I need more than a question. I need kind of advice from the panel, and not only from the panel, because you may remember that we are planning for a digital lab. Digital lab is not there. And I remember having several conversations with Emiliano about where we are aiming to. By the way, I need to pass a piece of information. Emiliano now is the coordinator of DARE at Italian level, because I resigned in November, and so now the position is for Emiliano. Unfortunately, he's not with us. So we will continue this cooperation, at least in Italy, between the IRIS and DARE. Coming back to the point, maybe we are too crazy visionary, both Emiliano and myself, but I need to know where we are aiming to, because we are actually aiming somewhere, and we have this nice period of 15, 20 years of building IRIS and everything correlated too. I feel, my personal feeling, and I've been involved in the ICT myself too. Was a software designer. I designed the software for the instruments that's still used around by my ex-research group. My feeling is that we speak about digital things. We are still speaking, so let's say, Stone Age problems. We are speaking about databases. Databases are very old. I feel that a database today is totally useless without tools. Maybe it could be useful to teach how
a software to extract information, archive it around, and I will train a software. You have the digital system there. Maybe the name will not be Siri, but I expect that I will be able to ask my digital research assistant very complex questions in the near future. And in our field, though, let's say one of these questions could be, look, I found this manuscript. There is a very nice fragment of drawing on it. Can you retrieve me, please, everything that is similar or related to your database, maybe before the age of that document and after it? Are you able to do that? Of course, we need a software. Not very difficult. Software image correlation, you can do something like that. But if you don't have the database accessible, you will not have the software. Because nobody is going to develop the software for access non-accessible databases or non-existent databases. And
Sure.
if you get only the database but not the tools, you will not have researchers. You think that the most important knowledge infrastructure around is Google. It's the aggregator of the knowledge that is freely available on the web. And it started like the aggregator of knowledge freely available. So we need to aim to this final situation, in my opinion, where we can have research in a virtual research environment on heritage, humanities, and humanities people can access heritage data and vice versa. When I am studying an object, I could easily switch to the knowledge content of the object. When I'm studying a stone, I can access the inscription and everything that has been studied. And when I'm studying the inscription on the other side, I can access the stone, where it's the inscription and the geographical context, historical context, because the way of doing research is doing correlation. And correlation and synthesis can be only, for the moment, be done by humans. But you need to provide the information to the humans. This is my idea of virtual research environment for heritage. But the information must be there. And in this very moment, we are discussing of possible, potential information there, with the exception of Camille and databases that are around. But we cannot survive with databases without the tools. So we need to convince people to produce possibly open tools too. It's very important. Because the infrastructure, this infrastructure is databases plus tools. That will provide the infrastructure services.
I think Luca has put his finger on one of the challenges for doing the research. There's the discoverability of information, but then the intellectual part of doing research requires our ability to synthesize. And I think we do rely on Google, and we are going to have to get over that in a little while. Björn, you had a comment or a question.
Yeah, well, it is a post. You mentioned that technical history is not being taught very many places. It is coming up more and more, and we have now a 2-year master course in English at University of Amsterdam in technical history, where anybody here can apply to be trained in that 2-year master. In University of Stockholm, they are starting up in September 17, also a 2-year master in technical history, combining the traditional art history. And I see from the colleagues I meet within the CODA, which is Curators of Dutch Influence Art Group, that there is more and more questions being aired about technical aspects of the objects that they are curating in the galleries, but also having more and more questions to the validity of the science that they are providing. So they will ask these groups more and more questions related to getting access to the data that we have. And their questions will be more and more complex, and they will question whether the data is trustworthy. I mentioned in my presentation chronology, and they are questioning more and more if the chronology dates that are being provided actually are valid, because there are so many aspects of dendro dating that are in the open. So what is the date in reality? And the more that kind of questions comes, the more the question comes to us as a conservation and conservation science as a group to provide sufficient amount of valid and validated data. And I think the demand will be increasing continuously, also thanks to the databases that
May I ask the audience if anyone has an idea of a tool that they wish was already existing to help them do their research in digital humanities or digital art history? So we're not quite getting the message out of what's available to be used. So, Cecilia, your group, we need to maybe help them think about what tools they would need to crack open some of the digital data we have, and that's where your work with training will help. Help people devise the questions that then we build the tools to answer, to crack open. Because some of these things are hard like walnuts. Well, if there are no more questions, and since Fenella has offered to, but before we do that, I'm just going to give everybody on the panel another 1 minute to, if they want, to summarize their thoughts about where we are and where they think we should be going next, and in terms of, especially maybe in terms of reacting to some of the questions that have come up. So, Michelle, shall we start with you at this end this time?
Oh,
You're feeling good about Cameo.
yeah, I'm feeling good, except Joe has introduced me to a lot of possibilities of things that can be done now that Cameo's on a MediaWiki platform,
Right.
as far as, because now it's multiple pages that you can search for. But apparently there's applications out there that can, you can ask questions and it can pull a set of pages together in a group and create answers to more than just the straight single material questions. So anyway,
That
hopefully-
actually would be really interesting. I was
hopefully
just
something-
thinking about some of these things which are like books that have the first page is for the introductory learner, the middle page is for the student learner, and the whole chapter is for the researcher. And the truth is that the digital assets that we are building have information at all of those levels. The challenge is to use them at our appropriate level. So if you're going to start, that's great.
Well, hopefully it gives me something new to think about.
That's great. Vanilla, concluding thoughts.
So I think that very much making the data accessible is the critical, but coming back to the data mining and the tools is absolutely has to be there. And I was on a working group at the library a number of years ago, and the whole point, they were saying, well, we've got this data and it's freely accessible, but the point was there's no way for people to actually get to it and mine it. And so I think those two together really is something we need to look at to make ourselves more functional to new audiences.
Teach two people to work together. That I
Okay.
think is not so easy. Because, as you said, it's more a matter of frame mind, a matter of how you think, how you approach different problems. The same questions tells different things to different people according to their background.
So we have bridges to build, as well as infrastructures under.
I think one of the dangerous things here when we start doing digital humanities research is the technology to some extent is not really the problem anymore. The problem is the questions and imagination of the people doing the work and people asking the questions. So we've talked a number of times about standards, and one of the biggest standards, the ontological standards to describe cultural heritage information now is something called the CDOC CRM. Now, the CDOC CRM has been around and devised for 20 odd years now, but they've just brought out some new ones. So there's one called the CDOC CRM INF, which is all about modeling belief. So you can go through the whole structure of ontologically modeling how much you believe something and whether someone else believes something else. And I think there is a danger to some extent of technological navel-gazing, and in that you can spend years doing technology research because it's interesting and the technology research is really good and it's fun to do. But without the two-way conversation between the people actually exploring the data or wanting to research the data that other people have gathered, we're missing the opportunity. And often it's people say, well, I don't really want to get engaged with the digital bit because I have no idea what it is and it's complicated. And then you've got the digital people who need to apply for a grant, and to apply for a grant it's got to be new and novel, which means they keep pushing the boundaries, and you end up with this bit where the technology is going like this, and you end up with a really sharp spike. So I think our difficulty moving forward is making sure that the developments in the technology are actually making people's lives easier and making the jobs they need to do easier and quicker.
Okay. Challenge.
Yes.
And I mean, I would sort of build on what Joe just said, which is that for me, I think it's extremely important to recognize that we need to have tools that are available that help people do what they actually want and need to do. Not to say that you close the door on the fact that there are things we haven't even thought about yet. And when Luca raises the question of, well, how do we create these tools? I think that it's going to be very important that the many databases, like for example, if one is looking for data, it's not very useful to a broad audience to absolutely have to know exactly what is this database and then go there and search that. You need to be able to find it more in a Google-like way, where the search for information doesn't require that you specifically go to one site. Certainly, I mean, with conservation space, that information which is made accessible to a broader audience, our hope is that if people use a Google search with the right tools, they can actually find us. And then, the gallery, for example, is the official archives of the Crest Foundation. And all of that information, which we're close to, will be made fully accessible to the whole broad community out there. And it's not absolutely decided, but almost certainly it's going to happen by putting that into conservation space, but will be available to the public. So I think that people using their normal search techniques like Google or something like that, and then finding out that there's this wonderful data out there, can really inspire people to dream things we haven't even thought of yet.
Well, that sounds like a very good moment to end. I would like to thank all the panelists and invite Fenella to come to the podium for concluding remarks.
This has got to be one of the most unwieldy microphones I've ever worked with. So just a few things to put out there to prime you for tomorrow and make sure that you're still all awake. So just an overview that we've had a really wonderful in-depth overview of the state of research infrastructure initiatives. We've looked at the challenges of promoting these at a policy level, and also looked at the differences in approaches between the European and the US approach, and the different funding models and how that ties into those, sort of pushing us in slightly different directions. That from the US side, a number of my colleagues and I, we've talked about the focus on some sort of consortium to provide a united front in lieu of our Ministry of Culture. And what I very much like from Jean-Gon was how the new baseline funding in the US, that we kind of are happy if it's flat and it's not shrunk. It's sad, but it's real. And how do we squeeze more from the resources we have through our collaborative efforts? And I think that's really what a lot of us are saying, that we are engaging in similar efforts, and if we can make better use of those, then we can really make things go a little bit further. What I did find very strong, though, is that the underlying thread in terms of the strength of the collaborations is the personal connections and interactions. And all of us have found and have been motivated to engage more effectively because of strong personal interactions and because we feel so deeply about what we do. And I think that's going to help us all move forward with this wonderful approach to really sharing and being engaged in what the field needs to, where the field needs to be. So this heritage network of experts and professionals, linked to the multidisciplinary fields and colleagues outside, is really what we're trying to pull together here. And just as a final point, what I really, really want is my own virtual digital assistant. So thank you all so much. If you have any questions about location, Odile is just at the back. And if any of you would like a quick tour through our labs just to see what we've got, we'd be delighted to host that. So again, thank you to all of the speakers today, and thank you all for your attention.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.